So I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and thank you for presenting, both of you, today.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to all and for giving us the opportunity to share our perspectives. And hopefully this presentation can be of great help for our participants in our community. As I mentioned, my name is Tony Hernandez. I'm an autistic self-advocate and also a bilingual associate of the Autism Response Team. And I'm going to ask you, to our participants today, we go to the next slide. I just wanted to give you a interesting fact. Next slide. Okay, perfect. Do you all knew that autistic people are 4 times more likely to experience depression throughout their lives than their neurotypical peers? However, researchers know little about why or how to best help autistic people or people with autism. And that's an interesting, statistics because we talk about mental health, especially in our community. But when researchers say that they don't know, they know little or they struggle in terms of how to really help not only neurotypical person, but more an autistic person in regards to mental health. That presents one of the challenges that we face in regards to mental health in our autistic and autism community. And to share a little bit about autism and mental health, we go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Autism, mental health, affects autistic human beings more, sometimes double or triple than neurotypical or normal people. And the statistics show that, for example, depression affects an estimated 7% of autistic children and 26% of autistic adults, as opposed to 2% of neurotypical children and 7% of adults, in the general population. And you guys knew that, in terms of anxiety disorders, we see that, this affects around 42% of autistic people compared to an estimated 3% of children and 15% of adults in the general population. So we see a tendency there that for autistic human individuals, the effects of mental health are more than double or triple in comparison to the neurotypical population. Next slide. Also, research suggests that, as part of mental health, obsessive compulsive disorder, or famous, OCD, is more common among autistic teens and autistic adults than it is in the general population. And also, and this is a very important statistics, ADHD, which is a common co-condition with autistic individuals, it affects around 30 to 60% of people with autism or autistic people versus only 6 or 7% of the general population. So in our autistic community, we face different challenges. Mental health in society, unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigmas and stereotypes out there about mental health. And unfortunately, those stigmas and stereotypes affects us more than the general population, in addition to other challenges that we face in our daily lives. For example, I want to go to to talk about more about this, stereotypes and stigmas. If we go to the next slide, according to this statistic, this data I'm going to show right now is more in general. It's not autistic, or autism specific. But according to the American Psychiatric Association, mental health stigmas stem from a lack of understanding and mischaracterizations of mental illness in the media. The same thing can be said about autism. Even though there's been more awareness, more acceptance especially, there's still a lot of misunderstandings about autism, especially in different areas of society. And also, the American Psychiatric Association describes 3 different types of mental health stigma, which are public stigma, self-stigma, and institutional stigma. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about each of them. Public stigma, and when we talk about public stigma, we mean we're referring to the negative attitudes, discrimination against individuals with mental illness, or misunderstanding, not understanding mental health, or creating a lot of stereotypes about that person without first understanding that person, what that person is going through. Which again, in our community, we deal with that as well, but even worse. And that's the reality that we face, autistic individuals facing with mental health challenges. So that's the one of the stigmas out there, public stigma. Another stigma is self-stigma. When we talk about self-stigma, it involves, for example, negative feelings, including shame, talk about mental health, to talk about this with others because we can be misunderstood and not going to understand what we're going through. They'll ridicule, make fun of us, misunderstand us, and that's what we refer to when we talk about self-stigma. Because again, not only in mental health, but especially in autism, unfortunately, we struggle with that. So self-stigma, we struggle with that big in our community. And then the third stigma, which is not talked about a lot, but it also has an impact in our community. Sometimes is institutional stigma. Government and organization policies restricting the rights and opportunities of those with mental health conditions, which is something that that also impacts our community as well. So you may be wondering why I'm talking about mental health. That why I'm talking about I'm not only an autistic self-advocate, but I'm also an advocate for mental health. And to share the why I'm talking about mental health, I want to share my story. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about who I am, where I come from, and how I got here in this position. So a little bit about who I am. If we go to the next slide. I was born and raised in the beautiful island of Puerto Rico, so I'm fully bilingual. I speak Spanish. Autism came to my life at the age of 3, and not to mention my age, of course, but I was diagnosed during the early 90s. And when I was diagnosed with autism, there was not a lot of information about autism. There was a lot of stereotypes, and there was a lot more focus on the term disability, burden. People with disabilities being a burden. So there was not a talk about autism as it is today. Because right now we have more of a platform to be more open about autism, and more people have diagnosis. But we talk about that in comparison to what it was in the early 90s. Because in the early 90s and before, people with disabilities, when it was more of a negative stigma. Again, the key word here, negative stigma in regards to people with disabilities. And going to my story, my parents were figuring out because they were seeing things different about me, and they were figuring out, what was wrong with me. And listen to listen to that question again. What is wrong with me? There's a negative connotation. I don't know is that the correct word, or a negative stigma in regards to that question. But again, that was the point of view about people if they saw that the baby or child was not acting normal. And that's what I went through. And my parents, they told them different things. I even have a a T-shirt told my mom. This is a part of my story. She told my mom that I was a complete retard and I won't be able to get anywhere. And that's when my mom, imagine that as a parent receiving that kind of comment, that disrespectful comment, ignorant comment of your child, it hurts. And it was very common, unfortunately, more during those years. But eventually, after a process, I was formally diagnosed as autism, as age 3. And as part of my struggles with autism, I went through, speech impairment, or in other words, I was completely nonverbal until age 4. I have struggles with social communication, which led me to have struggles in making connections and friends with people, especially in school. Some of the struggles as well, short-term working memory, and especially, anxiety, social anxiety, which is one of the challenges that is still, you may not see it or not, but it's still one of the challenges that I deal with to this very day. And as part of that process, if we go to the next slide, as part of the challenges, that I had, growing up as an autistic child, I went through different struggles in school. Mentioning challenges in creating friendship, bullying, rejection in school, being misunderstood. For example, when I have the other, kids or students in school coming up with jokes, a lot of times I was struggling in understanding what they were saying or why they were laughing about different things. And that created a misunderstanding that some people think that I didn't care or that I was boring, and they came with all the negative stuff that can be said. And as a result, I went through a lot of social rejection. I didn't know exactly what I had, but I always, from early age, I always felt that there was something different about me in comparison to the other, normal kids. And as I grew up and I developed, thanks to the supports that I received, from therapies, for example, um, I received support for therapies for speech, which helped me to become verbal, uh, for a couple years. Then I received supports for occupational therapy as well, and those therapies helped me to develop. Eventually later on, I was formally more, reevaluated when I was 7 or 8 years old. As back then, it was before Asperger's syndrome. Sometimes, I still use Asperger's syndrome because that's my diagnosis, my last diagnosis. I know that Asperger's, especially here, in the U.S., is level 1 or high functioning autism, but I still, go with Asperger's, sometimes, but that's just me. Um, but overall, you know, growing up with all these things about autism, Asperger, it had an impact in my life. And as I was growing up, going to later to middle school, it got worse because I was going through bullying, homophobic, bullying, attacks about my character, and it was very tough. And as a result of that, I went through a severe depression, which got worse and worse and worse per year. I was fortunate enough during these years to have different hobbies that helped me to survive those years, like video games, doing drawings, arts, Star Wars. For me, doing these hobbies was just simply doing hobbies. For me, was disconnecting from the ugly world that I was living and focusing on my world and to be, to survive. And, I talk about that in my works, in my book as well, how I use hobbies to survive. And yeah, but despite those challenges, in terms of academic performance, I was able to do very well. Credit to the support of my different teachers, also my family. I had struggles with my family as well. My parents, they got divorced when I was 5 years old. But despite those challenges within my family, my parents did the best they could to provide the best support for me, and that helped me to get to be able to finish high school and graduate with my high school diploma. And now talking a little bit, and if we go to the next slide. Now this battle of depression that I went through, especially middle school, high school, it composed of different factors. One, the use of antidepressant pills. My dad, because I was living with my dad in my teenage years, took me to see a psychiatrist. I had to use pill or Zoloft, at that time to to help me with my depression. Also dealing with anxiety, isolation, and rejection, especially in those years of school, and an increase on suicidal thoughts because the rejection it got so bad, and I felt that nobody was understanding me. He got to a point in which I don't know if I was going to make it. There were several times, excuse me, that I thought was not even I wasn't going to be here. But there was something that helped me, that told me to not give up, to not give up, to not leave, to fight harder to achieve a better life. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. So yeah, that was a little bit about my depression battle. I did a couple of things to take, in order to get ahead of life. If we go next to the next slide. After graduating high school, I went to college. I left, in Puerto Rico the first 2 years, but I was going through different struggles of depression still, and also some situations in my life. I left college, moved, to U.S. to Florida with my mom, And after that, I began to find a way to start in my life to be somebody in life. And the first thing I needed to do was to get a job. I was trying to find a job that will be more of a fit as for me as an autistic person or Asperger. And I read an article one time from Dr. Temple Grandin in which she describes the different lists of jobs that are recommended for autistic people, for visual thinkers and other types of thinkers as well. But she also had a list of not, recommended jobs for autistic people. And then on that list was the cashier position or customer service. And the ironic thing is that, after months of struggling finding a job, the first ever job that I got was in customer service, ironically, in the retail environment. People ask me how did I got that job, with my struggles with communication and also eye contact. I always told the employer that my focus was to help. I can help you with this, this, and that. And that's how I got the position. And yeah, my first job was in customer service, working in a retail environment, which I felt like for me was like another type of therapy. And the reason why I mentioned that is because I felt like I was in school again. Retail environment, customer service is a fast-paced, multitasking environment, which social communication is, requires pressure in social communication, pressure of sales, fulfilling goals, and it was a struggle to work in that environment. I thought I was not going to survive, to make it short. But one of the things, and one of my hobbies, not hobbies, but my abilities, especially as a person with autism, autistic person, is that in autism we talk about the repetitive behaviors, right? And the ironic thing is that repetitive behavior or repetitive tasks help me to survive those jobs because customer service and sales jobs tend to be very repetitive, tend to be, and because of this, facing different circumstances. Not saying it wasn't easy, it wasn't. Um, it helped me to survive those jobs, and because I was able to learn the systems, I was able to learn the processes. I was also able to learn through the repetition of situations, helping the customers, finding the solutions to their problems, and that's when, I think that the experiences in life, because of the, I can have to say that I went through the school of hard knocks in life, helped me to become stronger under the difficult circumstances and be able to survive that job. And which is one of the things I always tell parents, with their loved ones with, autistic children, is that you have to get them out of their comfort zone, to be able to, again, that's the way I see it, to be able to learn and grow in life because life is not easy as it is for anybody, even more for autistic people and their families. So it led me to work. I was able to get employment in customer service for almost 10 years, and yeah, even becoming a manager one day. So yeah, that's my employment experience. Then later I went back to college and I graduated, as you can see there in the picture. And I didn't put that picture just to feel special. Yeah, I think I did. But this was very important because in this moment, the college the president of the college was doing recognitions, and the recognition um, that she did for me was as a college graduate, autistic graduate, college, an autistic graduating from college. And to stood up in front of thousands of people was truly an honor. And for me, it was important a confirmation of who I am, and it became a confirmation of what my mission and what is and what it is today is to be an advocate for autistic, human beings and their families around the world to to tell their story. I'm just one story in this autism world. There's more than 70 million, autistic human beings out, in the world, that we need to give more opportunities for more stories to be told. And yeah, that's what became the confirmation of my mission as an advocate. So next slide. So what you asked me, what helped me or what helps me to manage my daily life? Different things. For me, the most important is faith. I know that, there's different faiths, people with different faiths, beliefs, But I have one belief. I believe in God. I'm a Christian, and I believe that God is for me the center of my life. And I pray and I put my life in God's hands to do the best I can each day because I believe that without God, I wouldn't be here right now. And for me, faith is the most important. Obviously, going to church and pray, and that for me, that's the most important thing. Another thing that helps me is focus on being my own best friend. One of the struggles that I had is making friendships with other people. But what helped me to survive was that I had to start to become my own best friend first. And so I started doing things on my own, going to the movie theaters on my own, restaurants on my own. Later, I travel on my own, and and you need to be your own best friend first, because the best friend that you're gonna ever have, is within you. Obviously, for me, God is my best friend, of course, but you need to be your own best friend as well. So that way you can attract not only friends, but also attract the right friends into your life. That's the key, the right people in your life. And that's why I always tell parents with their loved ones, starting with hobbies, start with your hobbies. I like to walk, exercise, I like to travel, connect with people with the same hobbies, and that way you can make friends. Exercise, health, nutrition, that's very important. And talking with people, even though there's no formal connection in, at least in the beginning, talking with people and being, you put yourself out there is what helps me, continues to help me in my life as an autistic individual. So overall, if we go to the next slide, what I want all of you, whether you're a parent, or artistic self-advocate, or professional, or provider, is I want you to to take all of this. The first thing I want you to know is to learn about mental health, especially in autism. Understand the stigmas and the stereotypes that impact the quality of life of autistic individuals. That's the number one. Number two, inform. Inform others about the effects of mental health on the well-being of autistic human beings and their families as well. Because, mental health in our, parents and caretakers, yeah, it takes a toll, and we need to provide more care, more support for the caregivers and caretakers as well. That's very important to talk about the different methods and strategies to work with mental health challenges. And last but not least, share, share with with your team members, providers, everybody that you know, one, the effects of mental health on the quality of life of a child with ASD or autistic child. Two, work on self-care strategies to help cope with mental health. Three, the importance of self-worth to know that they have a purpose in this world. Fourth, the importance of exercise and nutrition and working with mental health. And five, exposure to more outdoor activities and social interactions, for example, starting, as I mentioned, social connection through hobbies. And I would like to, if we go to the next slide, I have some resources I want to share with you that can be of help for you. We have, obviously you're going through a crisis or, suicide, and, we have there's the 988 line, very important. We also, I want to share those resources for anxiety management, providing support for anxiety, anxious. If we go to the next slide, we also have resources in regards to depression and autism. Some resources which are going to be shared once the presentation is done. And hopefully these resources can be of help. And hopefully my story, again, it's just one autistic story from one autistic perspective can be, if you take something from my story, can be of help for you guys, for in your life. So that's for me for my story. And I'm now going to pass it along to my colleague, Maddie.
Thank you very much, Tony. My name is Maddie Dever, and I'm autistic. I'm a non-binary and use they, them pronouns. I'm a parent of four kids who are also autistic. I am diabetic. I'm a wheelchair user due to a spinal cord injury. I am white with long brown hair. I wear glasses. I'm sitting in a black office chair. I'm an Ottawa Senators hockey fan, which is where I normally make a joke to Toronto Maple Leaf fans. I am Canadian. I'm also the co-vice chair of Autism Alliance of Canada, the largest national autism organization and coalition in Canada, and I'm also involved with many different ECHO programs across North America. I live in rural Eastern Ontario in the traditional territory of the Assiniboine, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaty, and all of these describe parts of my identity and make up who I am. All of these words identify me in positive or neutral ways. And there are many other words that could describe those same aspects in negative ways, focusing on that which I can't do. However, I choose instead to live my life and describe myself and others in a strength-based way. Um, okay. I started out this journey when my first child was diagnosed with autism. It was not something I was too much aware of 20 years ago, but I knew that it was something that absolutely, go back one slide. I knew it was something absolutely frightened my mom. However, my journey as a parent of an autistic child started out a lot different than many parents upon hearing a diagnosis. For me, I felt it was the greatest day ever because I had a name that described my son, that put into context why he didn't talk much, why he didn't seek play with others, amongst many other things. I remember going on a train ride for a business trip shortly after getting the diagnosis and searching the internet, scouring, devouring everything I could now that I had a label to look for. Autism has never scared me. Long before I myself was diagnosed, I could never see autism or even autistic traits as something to be afraid of or ashamed of. I've spent much of these last 20 years working to share that understanding of autism with educators, other parents, as well as with politicians and policymakers. Since that day, almost 22 years ago, I've had a total of four children, and with each child began a new journey of neurodivergence. All of my children are autistic. The neurodivergent jackpot. They are all different, yet also similar, and they have many strengths and many challenges. They are all over the autism spectrum. Next slide. I am Canadian. I'm a parent. I'm a child. I'm right-handed. I am white. I am gifted. I am a Sens fan. Again, sorry, Leafs fans and whoever else you like in hockey. If I used person first language to describe these parts of me, it sounds like this. I have Canadianness. I have offspring. I have parents. I have right handedness. I have whiteness. I have giftedness. I have a fan interest in the sense. None of this sounds right. It doesn't feel comfortable describing myself this way. And even my grammar check had a hard time with this. I want to draw attention to one thing I said. I said, I am gifted. Not that I have giftedness. We overwhelmingly use identity first language to describe positive traits. The issue isn't that we need to center the person and not the disability. The issue is that we are seeing disability as a significantly negative thing. And the vast majority of autistics and many other members of other disability communities prefer identity first language. I am autistic. However, it's not universal, and each community and each person gets to choose how they identify. Next slide. A good rule of thumb, though, is that when it comes to talking about a person, use their name. But consider using identity first language and always ask if you are uncomfortable saying is autistic, then use the diagnosis neutrally by saying on the autism spectrum or is diagnosed with autism. Next slide. So it has taken me 48 years to grow, change, and mature to be the advocate I am today. Looking back at child me or teen and young adult me and the me today, it may be hard to see the same person, but my heart has always been the same. I was a wild, hyper, effervescent, constantly questioning, constantly inquisitive, and precocious child. I didn't have too many fears, and I wasn't afraid to talk to anybody anytime about anything. But I did not do well in sustained relationships. I was bullied constantly, and that many, many traumas which warped and changed my direction. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 5, and I was a guinea pig for many meds and then diagnosed with an alphabet soup of many conditions until finally resolving things with an autism diagnosis in my 30s. That really made sense. Even as a parent, as an autism advocate and baby Autie, my advocacy was very direct, brash, and full of rigidity as to what was right and wrong. And I know I burnt many bridges with other parents and even other autistics in those early days of my advocacy. I was what I would call an angry autistic keyboard warrior trademark. I was filled with facts, experience, and of zeal to see the world change, to accept and work well with my kids, myself, and every autistic out there. I did not understand why I got such a hostile reaction from the community that I was trying to help. These past few years, I had to learn one very important lesson to be able to see my advocacy be effective. I had to learn to listen. It all started shortly after one of my girls had a major mental health crisis. Our relationship up to that point involved her doing something dangerous, me screaming at her or restraining her so she couldn't hurt herself, others, or property. And this was damaging her and our relationship. And at one point, when she was in a meltdown, I decided to just sit down beside her and not say anything. I let her ride out the emotions. And then when she was able to talk, I just listened, really listened, and everything changed. I realized that in my advocacy, I needed to find a common ground with parents and other autistics who are on the same page in demanding change. Education is where I found it. Our story is a common story, and I was able to rebuild some bridges and build many new ones. I held back from sharing some of my strong opinions and made myself available instead to be asked for my take on things. I went where parents and clinicians were, and I got involved in building and changing our government policies together. Everything that has been built upon that and has allowed me to share some of the harder things in a way that they can relate to their own path, their own children. And I realized several years ago that if I want to change the way we work with autistic people, we also need to change our own attitudes. And I see the best way of changing attitudes is by changing our own vocabulary regarding autism, autistics, and disabilities in general. And I've been able to branch out and use my new networks and connections to speak and educate parents, professionals, and researchers, especially on how to change the language we use to speak. And I could not have done any of this unless I came to see what I needed to change in me. Change is hard, change is necessary, change doesn't have to be sudden, but we need to find a way to embrace it. Next slide. The one truth about autism is that autistics can be much more sensitive to their sensory environment. We are sensory beings. We need either more or less sensory stimuli in our environments. When we are sufficiently stimulated, we can be in sync with those around us. We can concentrate. We can do the things that we love and need to do. We can enjoy life. When this is out of balance, so are we. Our sensory mix can be closely tied to our mental health status as well. Anxiety and excitement for us is very much two sides of the same coin. And some of what can excite us can also cause us to get anxious. Finding the sensory string to pull is vital to helping us keep things equilibrated. If we are struggling, look at what our senses are experiencing. What sounds, sights, smells, feels, and are nearby? Do we react with soothing to certain music, certain level of lights, certain smells? For myself and my kids, we need different mixes to be able to cope well. For me, the invention of the Apple AirPods Pro with noise canceling has changed my life. So much of the noises that I hear that most people don't get, like electrical signals, lights, they get blocked, and I only hear the conversations right around me. I can put the sound of thunderstorms or waves on and can then step back and breathe better. And one of my kids is smelling tubes of lavender. That's what really helps her. Find the sensory strings that we need to sometimes be suggested to for when we get stuck. And for me, so much changed when I adopted a strength-based approach to my life and to the language I use. 10 years ago, I was in horrible pain, and so many doctors wouldn't help me or even hear me once they saw chronic pain on my chart. I had a pain specialist, though, that I finally saw who told me that there is no such thing specifically as chronic pain. All pain is acute. And it's chronic is just the length of time that you have it. If you find where the acute pain is coming from and you treat it, you can reduce or eliminate pain. And just being validated that my pain was what was caused by something real was enough to also change my life. And I haven't looked back. Next slide. I'm not going to sugarcoat this next section. I'm autistic and I tend to be very frank. Schools are a sensory hell. One of the things that we need to address in schools is the fact that autistics are significantly more challenged again with sensory stimuli. And sounds, lights, smells, tastes, the feel of things, all of our senses tend to be wired a little bit different. And all of these things are in abundance at schools. Schools, again, are a sensory hell. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience in elementary school. I could hear every electrical plug, every fluorescent light, and so many times in class I'd be distracted from what anyone else was saying because I was too caught up in identifying where the sounds were coming from, where when there were lights slightly out of frequency from each other or where they were dying, I would be freaking out and it'd be unsettling. I was also very bothered by sudden loud noises. Fire alarms and drills were the worst. After one would go off, I would spend the next week sometimes hiding under my desk with my hands over my ears. When I would walk through the hallway, I'd walk with my hands over my ears and run as fast as I can whenever I saw the red fireball. Smoke detectors would exact the same issue, and the sound of a dying battery would keep me on edge, afraid that the alarm would go off at any moment. I still have this anxiety about smoke detectors to this day, and I'm like feeling it now as I'm talking about it. Here are some of the sensory challenges that students have in school. There are so many sounds that we find in schools: sneakers, gym floors, the cacophony of kids, lights, paper, lighting that is either very bright or dim, or even the changes from one room to the next can be difficult. Too much sudden movement. In an online world, too many comments streaming through the side of a video. The reverse is true. Not enough visual stimuli to correlate to the audio that we are hearing. The smells of food or cleaning fluids or body odor or erasers, the taste and texture of foods and other things that we may put in our mouths, whether we should or not, the feel of our clothes, people touching us, the feeling of different types of paper. We need to think of all of this when we're in school and how to help us. Next slide. So let's talk about stimming. Is that the right slide? Nope, one over. One more. There we go. There has been a lot of effort in the past focused on stopping autistic kids from stimming, this selective stimulation. So I need to explain to you what it is like to be an autistic. Some part of me is always in motion. What you can't see right now is my legs are moving back and forth. I'm either swaying, rocking, tapping, humming, and it looks like, and it looks, and it took me into my late 30s before I realized that this was me and I needed to do this. All my life, people, parents, teachers, coworkers, would tell me to stop or make fun of it. Now I realize that this hum is like an engine inside of me. And when it is allowed to be, the engine of my life runs well. When it is stopped, it starts to go off course and gets difficult. To we autistics, stimming is as natural to us as breathing. It can help us focus, self regulate. Consider stimming to be an energy that regulates through us. It ebbs and flows through increasing when we are excited or anxious and slowing so we get calmer. However, if we are made to stop a particular stim, that energy still exists and it needs to go elsewhere. Stopping stims can cause us to lose the self-regulation and or our self-control, and behaviors can come out and be much harder to manage or stop. So it is really important to understand that unless a stim is causing harm to the autistic or others, it probably shouldn't be stopped. The fact that it may be bothering others is not a good reason enough to get an autistic to stop. So help those other students instead, or the other siblings, as the case may be. Next slide. The key thing to helping an autistic grow is to find out and understand what your child's strengths are and what their interests and passions are. Then find supports for you and for your child that follow these strengths. Autistics will have many different challenges in their lives, many barriers, and many ways that we may find ourselves sometimes stuck. use the strengths and interests, as ridiculous or strange as they may be, and you will be amazed at the path to growth that you will find. And I talk about some of the aha moments in parenting is what I call them, that I have learned so much about autism through my kids. I'm just going to end by sharing a few. My son, who's now turning 25 next month, was playing in our sunroom, his toy area, with his Thomas the Tank Engine tracks and trains. And I could tell he was totally engaged with the storytelling, as there were similar sounds to the dialogue from the TV show, but different as well. Normally, people try to get him to engage with them and come up with their own stories and wait for him to join them, which he would never do. This time I listened in and I joined his story, and I said some of the dialogue from this show, and I watched it a lot with him. After all, he stopped, looked at me, and responded back to me. And over the next hour, I went into his world. And while it wasn't conversational, it was a back and forth that he led me through. This was groundbreaking in our relationship. And from that point onwards, I stopped trying to get him to come into my world, and I fully entered into his world. Our relationship changed, and so much of my angst about not communicating with him went away. The second aha moment came a few months later. He was in senior kindergarten, around 5 years old, and his younger sister was in junior kindergarten, again, 4 years old. They were 11 months apart. Crazy times. They both were in school for half days, and the other half day, I homeschooled them with a program called Phonics Museum. It was a program that taught letters and sounds and words phonetically through music and some worksheets. Both kids loved the music part of it, so much that we listened to Phonics Museum songs all through the day and night. And after 3 months, all of a sudden, my son went from speaking 10 to 15 words to hundreds of words. He had figured out the rules so that he could speak and spell almost every word. And this, of course, annoyed the younger sister, who, up until this point, had a bigger vocabulary. They've gone on to ping pong in terms of abilities over their childhood years. Music has helped unlock the mystery of how words were made and sounded. Music was always my son's joy, and we are a very musical family. Both his mother and I performed music in choirs and in operas and other musical groups. So he has been surrounded by music since birth. However, music had yet another surprise in store for me and my connection with my son. We were again playing in the sunroom with some of his toys, and at one point, and I have no idea why I did this, but I wanted to ask him a question. So I sang it to him. He stopped what he was doing, sang back to me an answer. He had never, ever responded to a question from anyone. Communication with him was always one way. He could ask us questions or make a statement to us, but anything we have ever said was absorbed into whatever he was chattering about. This was groundbreaking, and over the years, he grew and was able to answer, usually with a processing delay, questions from others. But if ever there was something I needed him to know and acknowledge right away, I would sing to him, and he would sing it right back to me. So, the key things that I learned from these aha moments: presume competence. Just because you don't see a child being able to do something, it doesn't mean there isn't thinking and processing behind that. And you just may not have found the way to connect yet. Agency, and we mentioned this earlier, enter their worlds. Almost every autistic, including myself, has had at times or still has their own world that they also live in a sort of interconnected way. Spend the time trying to connect into their world, use their language and descriptions of things. And if they let you in, you can build an amazing rapport. Music can be an amazing key to connection. Singing, listening, learning. I've used music as a way to help kids relax, excite, and bond. Find the music connection to a child and watch things bloom. So, use music, dance, and silliness, stories to connect with your child. Find the spark and fan the flame, and most importantly, presume competence. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Tony, so much. This was just a beautiful presentation for so many reasons. And I hope you both have an opportunity to look at the chat, because the messages of thanks and inspiration that you've provided to people are really overwhelming and really touching. So bravo to both of you. Thank you so much for being so willing to and open about sharing your lives and your experiences, and giving all of us moments of encouragement to do better. And when we're with the individuals with autism that we love. So thank you both so much. We have some time for questions. And I think we have a couple that have come in that Sabrina's going to start us off with. But if you have a question, please feel free to drop it into the chat. If we have some time, we'll unmute you as well. So Sabrina.
Yeah. First of all, I really think I love this idea of you two doing a TED Talk. So just throwing that out there into the universe. If the two of you would like to collaborate on something. But I know, Lisa, I think